Hey, good afternoon. I need a short then. Good afternoon, everyone. Excellent. So I'm thrilled to be here today. Really see some happy faces, some folks, is really kind of enthusiastic about what's happening here today. And I'm thrilled to be here. My name is Carlos Cruz Casas, or C3, as you probably heard this morning. And I'm really, really, I think it's one of the first time I get to moderate a panel. Right, so Andrew has moderated my panels before. He behaves, so I'm going to try to do the same thing for him today. So just be fine. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for the Department of Transportation and Public Works for Miami-Dade County, and also a founding member of the Open Mobility Foundation. It's been almost about 4 years, Andrew. You can believe that, right? And I know that today we just have under 1 hour. Right? So, and this is going to be a lot of great information that we have in here. But what I want to do is trying to use this time for us to basically spark some interest, some curiosity about MDS 2.0, and really what does it allow to us to unlock and enable our cities to go forward. So, and on top of that, I think we have another special moment today. It's full of facial things. It's an announcement of sorts, if you will, where. In a moment of celebration, if you think about it, and also the first step, right, the new chapter for municipal governments in the digital infrastructure world, in the fact that we're migrating now to be more open. And we're going to get into that conversation here. And today, on behalf of the Open Mobility Foundation, I'm thrilled to announce that the release of MDS 2.0, right? So I think it's huge right now. Can we get that? Can we get excellent. There you go. It is a major upgrade to our globally adopted, and I think this is huge for us to mention, we'll get into details, globally adopted Mobility Data Specification. But instead of me speaking the full hour here, I want to turn around and I want to make sure to introduce this amazing panel that we have here. So if you can go quickly, a quick self-intros, and then we get to the conversation. Does that work? Excellent.
All right, fantastic. Thanks, Carlos. Andrew Glass-Hastings. I'm the executive director of the Open Mobility Foundation, and as Carlos mentioned, it's a really big day for us. In a relatively young organization, sort of releasing the next version of kind of our signature data specification, known as the Mobility Data Specification. And for me, the kind of core at this, and we'll get into more of this conversation, so I'm not going to go through all the details right now. But it represents a real maturing of the spec, moving beyond its initial use case and really spreading into more of the modes of transportation that we all and that people in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in our cities rely on every day, and giving cities the tool to be able to keep pace with the changing dynamics of mobility on the streets. So it's exciting to be here. Really wonderful to be able to launch this. I feel like in some ways it's the worst kept secret, because we're an open source organization. So we've had a very public process in the development of MDS 2.0, but now it's the culmination, the official launch of this new data spec. So excited about the conversation.
Wow, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today, actually, in Miami and on this stage with actually LADOT, with you, Connie, with you, Carlos, because obviously Miami and LA have been since the beginning very innovative in this field of mobility data specification and the OMF. And to have you, Andrew, as well, leading the OMF, to which we have been founding partners since the beginning, and in trust and in relationship with the LADOT since the beginning to create that new data standardization all together. And we see how today it has been clearly taken, appropriated by cities, not only in the US, but actually almost everywhere, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Europe, and making actually for cities really a fantastic standardization, having MSPs being plug and play to something that is really helping the 4 key challenges that every city has, which means equity, which means being carbon neutral, which means safety, and which means at the end of the day also making every people very happy in terms of accessing mobility. So very happy to be here and excited, and let's do it.
Great. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone is still awake. I'm sure everybody had some fun last night. Connie LLanos here. I am the interim general manager for the Los Angeles Department of Transportation. And as The folks here have mentioned Los Angeles does have the privilege of being able to say that we really helped shape MDS from its infancy. And I think today is exciting for me because we really start to see the tool mature. As we were talking about this panel and prepping for it, part of my job, I'm obviously meeting with lots of policymakers in Los Angeles. And if we think back to 4 years ago, 5 years ago, with the dissension of scooters on our city streets, right? And we think about what that climate was like, the excitement behind having a viable micromobility option, but also very real frustration with how our city's going to manage it, the chaotic stories. I mean, in LA, people were throwing scooters into the Venice canals. There was a lot of angst. There were threats to just ban the tool altogether. And here we are, right, 5 years later, and we are celebrating that we are not only were we successful, right, because I am on track to actually go back to the pre-pandemic levels of micromobility travel in Los Angeles. We'll likely hit or exceed the 8 million trips that we had last year on Dockless, right? Almost at that 9 million we had the year before the pandemic. I feel really good about that, and it's working, right? It is a majority, those first mile, last mile trips. We see most of those trips are less than a mile, taking cars off our streets, really helping us with those climate change goals. And you have policymakers actually acknowledging you did make it work. You made it work. You made it make sense. And as other cities are still grappling, right, we've all seen the headlines of cities banning micromobility. I think for LA, as we're envisioning an even more vibrant multimodal climate in Los Angeles, we can really see that the tool worked. And we'll talk a little bit more about how it has worked, why it's been so important, and how it's going to continue to expand as we look at this new iteration. So really excited to be here for this formal launch.
No, and we're honored to be here today, right, in Miami, CoMotion Miami, and the fact that it's starting in LA and is all over the world right now, and we see that through an open source collaboration throughout many cities, the fact that we can actually work together, which is a true collaborative approach to it. So guys, that was the short intros for this teaming here, right? So I'm really thrilled to get into the conversation right now. Let me get back to you, Connie, real quick, because probably everyone knows a little bit about the history, but do you all know that all this started in LA, right? That was something that LA said, I want to be able to do something, right? And then expand it. So do you mind basically saying why LA decided to basically tackle digital policy, which was not a term back then, and basically introduce it to your streets, and then why expand it further?
I feel like we should have a fade screen. Let me take you back. Back in time.
We're gonna look this way.
Down memory lane.
Down memory lane, yeah. I mean, this work started in Los Angeles, predates my time with the department, with the one and only Salita Reynolds at the helm of LADOT. She understood that there was a fundamental shift happening in transportation. The ways in which we were going to move were shifting rapidly. The modes people were going to be adopting were shifting rapidly. These were going to be operated primarily digitally. As a city, we're very much still operating on an analog basis. How do we merge? Because at the end of the day, what we want as a regulator of the public right-of-way is we want to create ease and safety and accessibility when people are trying to get from point A to point B. So you think about the document, Urban Mobility in a Digital Age, which came out, I don't know, maybe like 7 years ago. You start to think about what is a city going to look like when you have, and at the time, right, autonomous vehicles, advanced aerial mobility. That was where we were headed. That's what we were trying to plan for. Understanding we wanted to invite innovation in. I know Mayor Suarez, has sort of staked a claim that Miami is the hub of innovation, but in Los Angeles, we like to think, things start in LA. Sorry, Carlos. So we wanted to invite innovation in. We wanted those local jobs. We wanted that private sector partnership and investment in Los Angeles. How can we say yes? How can we say yes to the technology? Well, we just need tools. We need tools to be able to manage it. And then all of a sudden, you had scooters descend. And it gave us this opportunity to think about, in real time, how are we going to create and test out these tools? And it very much was a test. It started with a pilot around scooters. From the beginning, it felt very important and critical that the tools be developed in open source. Cities are far too often bound to black box solutions that they don't understand and cannot shift. And if we want to be partners with the private sector, especially today, we have to have the same nimbleness and flexibility that the private sector has. So open source gave us inherent transparency, enhanced flexibility, and just a tool for accountability. So all of those things were critical and really changed the game for cities, because for the first time, we could actually say to companies, no, we can be at the same table. We can take data in near real time, right? And we can really work together to make sure that this transportation is seamless and then it's serving everyone. And there were bumps in the road. For example, the first couple of iterations, I think we had a strong vision around equity. How can we actually create this and bring this as a transportation option to communities that lack options? That didn't work the first couple of years. So we had to make some tweaks, but that's the beauty of tools like MDS, right? They complement our policy decisions at the local level and are tailored, right? What I need in LA is not what Carlos needs in Miami, is not what Ramses needs in San Jose, et cetera, et cetera. So, and again, I go back to this one of my most vocal opponents of scooters in particular, who just recently was telling me, you were right. You guys were right. There was a way to make it work, and it might not be perfect yet. But again, 8 million trips around the city. Those are 8 million trips that didn't happen by car. That's really powerful, and it's complementing our transition to public transit, which is important.
That's phenomenal. And as you can imagine, right, a city as big as in LA, right, and having this, but then realizing that they're not alone in this, right? And then actually being able, and I remember that call from Celita, hey, Carlos, I need to talk to you about something. I want you to help me and basically help figure these out as we expand, because this is an issue that is worldwide, right? And that's why basically 13 cities got together and about 4 years ago decided to form the Open Mobility Foundation, which you're the executive director right now. So before we go into more details into 2.0, I think it was interesting to talk about, what's the value of the Open Mobility Foundation, right? And we talk about MDS, that tool, and how we can actually make it more functional to X amount of cities around the world that are using it today.
And actually, the Open Mobility Foundation was officially founded 4 years ago next month. And you can tell how we've reached a pinnacle here because we have branded socks. So, I mean, if you need your OMF branded socks, please talk to us afterwards. But and our pin. So we've reached that point where we actually have, as a nonprofit organization, have some good swag. But Carlos, to your point. So let's not assume that everyone knows kind of what we are as an organization and then what we do around the mobility data specification. So the OMF, as it's known, at our core is an international nonprofit public-private partnership that brings together cities and counties and other local and regional government agencies like Miami-Dade County, City of Los Angeles, and others, together with technology companies like Christophe's and mobility operators to co-create in a public, transparent way these open source data standards that then cities use to manage shared mobility on their streets. So fundamentally, MDS was created to enable cities to be able to keep pace with innovation that was happening in the mobility space. As transportation has become more and more digitized and continues to be more and more digitized, cities needed the tools, as Connie was mentioning, around new forms of mobility that are appearing on the streets, to be able to manage that as part of a larger transportation system. And so MDS is essentially a two-way common language. You can think of it as the way that cities can speak data from, or speak and understand data from multiple operators. So Connie's got, 10 different micromobility operators, 10, 12 different mobility operators in the city of LA, and tens of thousands of devices on the streets?
Over 35,000.
35,000 micromobility devices on the streets of LA, and yet using MDS, all of those devices and those multiple operators are essentially speaking the same language. So it makes it very easy for the city to understand how that system is playing out on the streets. And then what oftentimes, we talk a lot about data and about data, the data requirements and what the data that cities want. But I actually think one of the more compelling parts of MDS is the ability for cities to push digital policy back to those operators. And so instead of city staff having to communicate with 10 or 12 different people via MDS, the city in the micromobility context, cities can push where they want to establish designated parking areas, or how they want to establish speed limits when it comes to micromobility, or temporary no-ride areas in response to a farmer's market or a festival. And they can do that in this digital machine-readable format, which makes it incredibly easy for the operators to interpret and understand the communication from the city. So it truly is this two-way form of communication that has become a de facto global standard. There's no higher power that has anointed MDS as the right thing to do. It has essentially been the work of cities demonstrating that this is a successful model in which to work with private partners, work with the operators, and it has spread around the world. And as an open source organization, we actually don't know how many cities are using MDS, because you can use it without actually telling us or without getting our permission. And that's kind of in the DNA. And that's actually part of the value of the open source nature. Yeah. So I'm gonna pause there and turn it over. But
so that's great. I'm going to get to you real quick. But I heard a couple of things in there, right? The first thing is often people say that the government doesn't move at the speed of technology, right? And this is an answer. Right, this is basically an opportunity that we're actually moving that fast and basically creating the tools that we need in order to accommodate that. The other thing actually is that we're not reinventing the role of government. We've been doing management of the public right-of-way for years using analog signs, right, using all these things. We're just actually digitizing the way we express the policy and the rules of engagement. But we talk about...
Can I add one thing,
please
too?
do.
I think the third thing, which... It isn't a coincidence that it was city-led, right? I think it's about also answering that often heard concern from the private sector. Well, how can I create rules for so many different marketplaces? Yeah. It's consistency. Consistency is a fundamental element that this brings. And the more of us that are using it, the more we learn from each other. So it is a win-win. It's a win-win for cities, but it's also a win-win for the companies that we're trying to invite.
And that's where you jump in. I was going to ask you, this is a lot of cities here. We're talking about our role. What is the benefit for companies like you that you've been there from the beginning, right?
Exactly. So I wanted to jump on it, and especially on what you just said. It's the co-innovation between the public and private sector, having all those cities around. And from our perspective, being a data aggregator, we work for cities to solve their issues. We are listening. What are the issues from LA, from Miami-Dade, from San Jose? And it was really amazing to see that you need to have a standard, but it doesn't prevent R&D and innovation to go further to meet your issues dealing with delivery operations. When actually just prior COVID, all of a sudden you had the delivery bots that came actually on the ground in San Jose, where Ramses was saying, hey, can you help us actually to have MDS being compatible with that? And so we jumped on it, we worked on it. It was not yet in a standard, and now it will be part of MDS 2.0. So it started with the two wheels because they were kind of an urgency. All those operators were just coming with 20, 30K devices without having permit at the beginning. And now it's working really effectively and properly and supporting all the policies. But really, we work for cities and really helping them to solve their issues, which is leading us within the OMF to trial supporting four-wheels vehicles, car sharing, ride-hailing, freight, because we are talking about everything that moves, transportation of people, transportation of goods, which are participating to the congestion and what needs to be also solved in a city. So it's really good for the private sector because we are doing R&D. We go further in terms of technology, and we share it directly to 1 or 2 cities that want to innovate, like you, Carlos, in Miami, and you, Connie, in LA. And then you're right, when it's adopted by one MSP, and usually mobility service providers, whether they are in the delivery operations or people transportation, they are operating in multiple cities. And all of a sudden, you have this wide-scale adoption that comes just like that. And really, really interesting for anyone and every cities here around.
So a huge benefit also, not only for, again, our facilitators, right? You're facilitating tools for us to be able to manage, but even mobility providers. And now, actually, they can actually basically engage with one city and being able to translate that to another city. That's huge, not only for innovation and for new things coming through, but for the time that takes to launch and get to market. Right, I think we've seen struggles again, the nightmares we had with scooters and bikes. I remember OFO back in the day in Miami, and then let's not mention that again. But I think this is a good opportunity for us to basically get to market a lot faster, and ultimately, to get the results that we want. We want to move people, we want to connect people to opportunities, and so on. And I think that's a great opportunity to basically kind of get into. So this is exciting. So no doubts, right, guys? No doubts about what MDS is and what was done, what we've done with data policy, the infrastructure, right? Everyone is on perfect. So I know Raul has a bunch of questions in the back over there. So he's the chief over taxes here in Miami-Dade County, and I want to ask you, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about what is 2.0 and what's the direction that we're getting.
So MDS 2.0, which is really what we're here to talk about, is a representation of a major step forward for not just the Open Mobility Foundation and this public-private partnership, but the MDS spec itself. So MDS 2.0 does many things and was developed with a lot of time and energy, from the teams that sit up here today, but also many of you in the audience and a community of contributors, essentially volunteers who put in time and energy into building out the spec that we see today. I want to call out Michael and Angela in particular from the OMF team because their leadership and dedication, really helped. Michael leading our working groups, Angela leading our member engagement is really what helps you drive this work forward and gets us to where we are literally sitting today. So taking a moment and explaining how this spec actually came to be, and then I'll talk about what new modes are included. So the Open Mobility Foundation is an open source organization. What we do is inherently kind of public. So we have a MDS working group, and then what we're not talking a lot about today, but the CURB data specification, our sister specification, has its own working group. Those working groups meet twice a month virtually, and they are open to the public. You don't have to be someone special or a member of the OMF to participate and engage in these working groups, in this forum and community. You can go to our website and find out how to sign up for the email list and then understand what the agendas are for those meetings and what the topics are going to cover, and how to participate. And then what we do by extension in those working groups goes up on GitHub. Now I have to say, when I was starting at the OMF, the GitHub was scary. And I've come to realize that actually it's not a scary thing. It's an incredible resource because it is a repository and really essentially the story of how the OMF and our community works and the different contributions and questions and development process that's there. It's not just about ones and zeros in code. It's really about the people behind developing this spec in an easily accessible web format. So that's really how we work, and then we've got an established governance structure that with public and private members that represent a steering committee that helps drive the work of the working group. We've got a privacy and transparency committee, strategy committee, a technology council that's intentionally weighted more towards our private sector members. That is the kind of final arbiter, if you will, of the spec versioning before it goes to our board of directors, both which Carlos and Connie sit on. But the OMF board is unique in the sense that it is only public agency transportation, really city transportation executives that sit on our board. And so when they approve, as they recently did unanimously, of a spec version like MDS 2.0, that is really the cities speaking with one voice saying, this is the version of the tool that we're now looking to use. It sends a very strong message to the private sector that not only was this developed collaboratively, but now we're going to look to use it collaboratively. So MDS 2.0, the most interesting part of it is really that it takes the spec from a micromobility focus as the initial use case for MDS, and now applies passenger services, more of the ways that people move around our cities. So we're talking about taxis. We're talking about services like Lyft and Uber. We're talking about free-floating car share services. And then Christophe mentioned the kind of cute little outlier is the sidewalk delivery robots. These different modes of transportation that are appearing on our streets and sidewalks throughout the United States and around the world. But more important than those modes, and as much as I love those additional modes to the spec, MDS 2.0 is a demonstration that the MDS has any number of future applications. As cities look to evolve at that pace of innovation and need to keep up with the changing dynamics of mobility on their streets, they now have a tool that was built in an intentional, flexible way to help keep pace with that innovation.
And if I can add something here, the beauty of this release, it's also based on actually past trials with having the private companies like us actually trialing 4 cities supporting car sharing. Car share is pretty widespread in Europe, so very quickly we had to support cities with car share programs, and they wanted to have access to that kind of data, like city in Lyon with 3 or 4 different car share operators. So we were supporting this city using MDS as the basic standard to start and build on it, then supporting in San Jose the delivery bots, and then enriching and participating to the different working group to have it on GitHub, and then coming and accepting this new release. But cities are not there now here, and private partners as well saying, oh, I need to adopt this. No, cities are already having it, and now it's all about having it on a larger scale to have the possibility to have data accessibility to car share, ride-hailing, rideshare. And it's interesting to see that now in Europe, companies like Bolt, which is one of the big rideshare and car share operator in Europe, is now sharing data with some cities already. So really demonstrating the possibility to have access to that kind of new data that is key. I mean, this is the dream. I knew in the vision of Celida, oh my God, I want to have Uber and Lyft data for sure at some point. And now in terms of standardization, this is here. It's official, it's supportive, and it will come.
So that's phenomenal, right? So you see from a board that is very diverse, cities of different sizes, that is a vote of confidence that this is the direction forward, right? When you approve that 2.0, it is basically us saying we want to go in this direction. So Connie, right? So you're managing LADOT, right? You're managing the space there. How do you envision now? And I mentioned earlier, we're celebrating. Yes, we're celebrating. It's a great moment, but also it's the start of a new chapter, if you think about it. Now is basically it's broadening our opportunities towards how we can better manage the space. So what excites you about this, and what you think about moving forward?
Well, consistent with what we said, the vision was never to begin and end with micromobility alone, right? It was just the vehicle, pun intended, that we use to make this vision a reality. I think being able to now really think about how we include passenger service is fundamental, right? Thinking about delivery robots for me is the beginning of thinking about goods movement and freight, right? At the most micro level. The possibilities are endless. So yes, for me, 2.0 is really about the acknowledgement that there's another myth about government is that we're stale, right? It takes us so long to get something going, and then it's really hard for us to be flexible. And I think the inherent public-private partnership that we have that established MDS to begin with, 2.0 signals that there will continue to be evolution and iteration, which is new for government, but so necessary. Now for Los Angeles, we had a huge reboot of our taxi regulations in LA. We, like most cities around the country, for the last 12, 13 years, have really seen a fundamental shift in how taxis move around a city with the advent of TNCs. And while I now have a tool to access the data, I don't have the capacity to access the data yet. I have a couple legislative barriers in my way. but the door has been opened. I now could, right? If we wanted to actually start to think about seamless transportation systems. But the reboot of taxis was really about how do we give them an opportunity to also be on a level playing field with TNCs? How do we modernize? So, very tangible changes like no longer requiring, a certain type of design or paint color on vehicles to actually requiring that they be on MDS really helps to move that whole industry in LA forward. And the tool is going to enable us to do things that for a long time we've wanted to do and that we're not able to do now with TNCs. How do we guarantee that this service is actually serving everyone equitably? How could we create some efficiencies that could actually help the industry thrive? Can we create zones for pickup and drop-off that make more sense, that actually bring more success and more ridership for taxis? Let's think about that. Can we start to think about, dwelling, right? And what impacts that's having on our congestion, what impacts that's having on our climate, where that's focused and concentrated. I mean, the opportunities here really are they're wide open, and we're incredibly excited. And I'm excited that the taxi industry is excited in Los Angeles, right? I now have 5 out of 7 of my my larger taxi operators, because now we're permit system, no longer a franchise system. They are ready. They've adopted it, and they're working their tech to be able to fully integrate onto MDS. But the point is that we are not only receiving the new technology from the innovation space, but we're also helping pre-existing modes innovate within our city. I think that's really important if we really are going to meet the demands of how people want to get around.
That's fascinating, right? And I really love the passion, the approach, and the fact that it's innovation and basically but helping a community thrive, right? So, Raul, we really need to get some of these kind of taxi companies here to Miami to make sure that we're on the same page. I want to get to questions in a little bit, but I really appreciate the fact that this collaborative approach that the MDS facilitates through the OMF, the fact that the work that LA gets to work on, all of a sudden it can be fully scalable throughout many cities across, right? And we heard a little bit this morning from Ben Levine from the US DOT about the smart grants that are coming forward, and he mentioned about, CURB, he mentioned about, the number of cities out of the 59 cities that were selected out of almost 400 submittals, 9 of them were basically on CURB. 8 of them came in as a collaborative approach to use CDS and MDS. So you start thinking that even at that level, they're realizing that this is the path forward. It creates a lot more collaborative approach between multiple public sector and allows for better communication, right? So I know, Ren, you're paying attention because as we go through moving forward with the Smart Grant, how do we actually take this information and making it more palatable for our community than not necessarily on the space. But so I'm very enthusiastic about that and moving forward. So, Christophe, tell me more about then how do you see moving forward 2.0 and how does that benefit you? What's exciting?
So there are very interesting things. So we have now 2.0, which means going actually in wide scale with the 4-wheels car sharing, ride-hailing, taxis, freight. But it's interesting to see that by being really active in this field, by really promoting the data standardization, because the more data standard you have, being widespread, but the more cities are going to adopt. So it's good for the private partners as well. But we are already working in trying to have new modes coming, like autonomous vehicle, companies like Circuit, companies like Navia, companies like the flying taxis in Neom, where we've been working in already. The next specification may actually be in 3D. We may have actually to define a flying 8 within city to authorize that kind of new mode. That's the future. But remember, next year we have the Olympic Games in Paris, and Velocopter will be doing the first actually taxi delivery by drones. So it's interesting that it's already something that MDS is being used and trialed in cities like Neom and projects like that. You were mentioning CDS. We are all talking about getting data to apply data-driven policies. And you're right, data-driven policies means how I am regulating a device that is moving, but on where? On the public right-of-way. And everything is now connected. I mean, you have an infrastructure, parking meters are connected, you may have sensors, you have charge points. So you can really design kind of a digital twin city and apply policies for vehicles, but also based on actually CDS, a standard that can actually show data from the ground. I see a car, I don't see a car, I have a parking meters, I can define that, I can be aware that's a car, maybe even private car are actually using that space. For delivery operation, as you know, for the Smart Grant project in Miami, that there will be the possibility actually to monitor delivery zones using a camera or sensors, and that's the purpose of our Smart Grant altogether. So this is how we see the future. It's really interesting to see that there will be new modes coming, and the intention, it's actually to really provide the city the capability to have data-driven policies to support the goals of the city. And you need to have everything that moves actually, and how those kind of vehicles are actually being used in the city. And one very important thing as well, our transportation journey is usually made of different type of mobility solutions. I may start to walk and cycle and maybe take the public transportation. So you made it, you said it, we need to define where are the mobility hubs. Is this making sense here to have bikes and micromobility right next to that bus station if I want to have some service continuity? And that's why the whole picture is key, and that's why at the end of the day having all those data is very important, and it's only feasible with a standard like MDS.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think that for a long time as cities, we were sort of guessing where these assets should be, how people were moving, right? We can now use our own information, and it feeds our planning, and it also feeds the private sector planning. It's a very give and take relationship here. I think when you think about not only 2.0, but as I'm starting to think already ahead to 3.0 and 4.0, right? That becomes more and more critical.
Well, and so jumping off of the theme here, because I often think the OMF, MDS, I mean, there's a little bit of a paradox involved, because essentially there's a collaborative effort, develop tools that then for government to manage and, dare I say, regulate some of these services. And so you have to wonder, well, why does the private sector participate in that? Do they want to be regulated? Well, I mean, a lot of it comes down to a little bit what Connie mentioned at the outset around the success of Los Angeles's micromobility program. Is MDS is a tool to help city policymakers get to yes, and then be able to stay at yes by giving the city the management tool to be able to demonstrate that this system is not only working by the kind of the set of rules that the city has laid out, but is actually enhancing the mobility kind of ecosystem or mobility offerings, completing some of those some of the gaps that exist. So a big use case, and one of the areas of focus that cities have had when it comes to micromobility and using MDS as kind of the proof point, is creating better access to transit. Like, cities know they can't take a bus or a train into everybody's neighborhood and community. It takes long, it's expensive. Cities are having a hard time hiring enough bus drivers. So how do you fill some of those gaps using other systems and demonstrate that micromobility, for example, is actually helping people get to high capacity transit? And so I want to contrast that, and then I want to turn it over to Christophe and Connie. Hopefully, sorry, not taking a moderator role here, but turn it over to Connie, because I think like the compare and contrast Los Angeles and the success and the 35,000 vehicles they have on their streets to Paris, and their recent move to ban micromobility. And Paris didn't use MDS. They didn't take advantage of the management tool to be able to demonstrate to their policymakers, to their citizens, to the residents of the different neighborhoods who were unhappy about the proliferation of this mode, that it could actually be managed properly and be a really important part of their overall transportation network. So I don't know if there's any additional comments you have there in terms of the kind of the compare and contrast perspective there from two global cities.
Yes, so I'm French, so I'm going to talk about Paris. No, this is all about leadership. And I remember back 2018, Celeda Reynolds' leadership in this organization, this vision, was key to make it happen. And I remember, and we helped her as well at that time, but she visited Europe and all cities to really spread the vision to have this standard and also the OMF being set up. So if you don't have the leadership in a city, nothing is working. We are a tech company. We are a tech enabler. And we don't have any capacity to say, you should do that. And this is exactly and literally what you were just saying. To have Uber and Lyft data tomorrow, there is a lot of contractual regulation issues. So the city of Paris was clearly facing the same issue that you were having back 2019. So 4 years ago. And the demonstration of cities like LA, San Jose, New York, even London, it's possible to regulate efficiently using data-driven policies based on an MDS standard from the OMF and having something that is organized, efficient, complementary to public transportation, and really helping the goals of the city in terms of decarbonization, safety, and etc., and Vision Zero. So there were no leadership so far in Paris. And it's too bad because in Europe, it was clearly the most advanced city in terms of usage for micromobility. The number of micromobility devices were about 20K, but in an area that is really tiny compared to LA. So a lot of people were using it. There were these votes really managed by the city.
They needed to implement a vehicle cap. They could have used MDS for that.
Exactly, exactly. So at the end of the day, it was a political decision to stop it. The people who were actually voting against were not the users. It was made difficult to make it happen, or to vote, or to give a vote. So I am sure that the micromobility operations, bikes, car share, moped share, micromobility in general will come back in Paris. But it will be after Paris has a new mayor, I think. It's all about leadership.
Well, I mean, and I don't know if I can sit here and agree that Anne Hidalgo hasn't had some tremendous leadership for Paris, because she has.
She
right?
has.
I think many of us envy what she's been able to do to create some real transportation choice and option in that city. But at dinner last night, someone was asking me, well, is it just the ballot measure concept, right? And if you took it to the ballot, would LA also vote to eliminate scooters? But I really think they wouldn't. And I go back to this figure, right? I mean, 8 million trips is really incredible, right? Yes, we're a large city, but if you're thinking about that, right, with every trip usually being less than a mile, that's meeting a need. Now, I'm the first person to say, I'm not, here to say micromobility is the save-all, be-all, not in its current iteration. There are many people that are left behind. We're going to have a panel later today. For those of you who want to sit in on gender equity, we're going to talk a little bit about that, right, Susana? Because some of these tools were not built for all of us in mind. However, it is meeting a need for a good subpopulation in LA, and it's no longer creating an inconvenience for those who aren't using it. So I go back to that same fundamental concept that the tool allows me as a city to say yes.
Yes.
To say yes to the new technology. Yes, we will figure it out with you. I think, going back to that Uber Lyft concept too, and when we go back 12, 13 years ago, a huge reason why cities were written out and not given the ability to regulate was because of the argument that, well, it's impossible for us to innovate if we have to do a patchwork. We have to submit to a patchwork of regulations. They can't meet us where we are. It'll slow us down. It's that's no longer the case. So as I'm, thinking about Jeff and what he's experiencing in San Francisco right now with autonomous vehicles riding around his city, I'm thinking about MDS 3.0. Yep. I'm thinking about autonomous vehicle technology. I'm thinking about advanced aerial mobility technology. I want to say yes, 100%. How? That's really what we're talking about when we're talking about this tool.
And to complement here, what's happening right now in France is actually the data standardization and the regulation in general of that kind of new mobility solutions are now slowly but surely being taken at a government level, at a national level, to regulate, to make it possible, because people want it, people use it, and this is a success in every city. So at the end of the day, it will fall in a new regulation, maybe higher than some cities in France at the end of the day.
So I'm taking back the mic here. So this is a phenomenal conversation. You guys can tell,
Carlos,
right?
why don't you tell us why you're excited for MDS
I know.
2.0 in Miami?
Oh yeah, you want to switch? So I'm super excited, right? The way that I expressed this, that we are a mobility management agency. Our responsibility is to manage efficiently the use of the space. Right, and I think now we struggle as transit agencies to actually provide fixed route services and on-demand services throughout the entire community. And 10 years ago, if you say the word transit desert, you'll be kicked out of the room. Today, it is possible as long as you're not a mobility desert, right? And I think to your conversation, I think you guys really kind of cover everything like from head to toes. And what I'm very passionate about is the fact that now not only I can do dynamic policies, right, for multiple modes, for everything that moves in the public right away, but also start talking about the incentives and start talking about how we can actually, apply an incentive. So because we talk about scooters and micromobility and all these things, but let's be real, sometimes a $5 trip is not something that everyone can take, right? And in some of these areas, right? So if I can provide a policy and I can provide some incentives, I can immediately look at how it's actually making a dent, measure, adjust, and move on, right? So I think that I'm very passionate about that. So the fact that it's no longer just scooters, is basically things that move in the public right away, things that have an impact, and actually we can control that, if you will, a little bit. I remember the Miami Herald reporter, he went out to the Dayland area in South Miami and basically said, I'm going to use a scooter and I'm going to tell you how it goes. And then he calls me like, I cannot turn off, basically close my reservation. This scooter is broken. And I'm like, no, that's digital policy because we do not want you to park there, right? So that's a true story, right? And I think this is what people need to understand, that when we talk about data, it's not about data. It's rules of engagement, embedding into the process of a micromobility device, of a car sharing, of a taxi, and basically make sure that that policy gets into the process. So there's not human decision making. It's actually system-to-system communication that allows that. I'm really passionate about that because we are tasked to move people. We have limited public right away. We have limited resources. How we can maximize that, right? So as you can tell, we can talk about this for hours. There's probably a happy hour later today. We can talk about socks or stickers and other things. But we have about 4 minutes left. I know there's a million questions, but any burning question that you want to get in, and some comments in here. This is a very educational component about MDS today. No? No takers. Excellent. So there you go.
Hi, this is Peter Boutan. I'm a managing director of IT solutions for Markman Solutions. Question. So MDS 2.0, this is actually my first time learning about this, so thank you for the explanation. Has there been consideration for cybersecurity implications and risk management for the city and private companies for data in transit, data at rest, breach connectivity?
I'm going to let the private software company take that one.
Yeah, so the relationship that we have with cities like LA or New York is clearly asking that we are liable for data breach. So cities like London and New York, as an example, clearly ask us to be ISO 27001 certified. They are conducting every 6 months cyber attack from third-party companies to check that all the data, because it's kind of PII if you're in some point, is highly protected. So that's part of the agreement that we have, absolutely.
It's a really good question, and one clarification that the OMF as an organization never holds any of the data. The data flows between the operators and the city, and via MDS as the format, as the specification of that data. But the OMF is not inserted in that data flow. Now, in most cases, cities never actually have the data directly either. It flows from the operators to a software platform like Blue Systems that then provides a service to cities, be able to actually make sense of that data, be able to have the insights and understanding in an aggregated format, in an appropriate dashboard for those kind of planning and management purposes. So there's a lot of time spent, and I mentioned our Privacy, Transparency, and Security Committee that spends a lot of time ensuring that that privacy is kind of the utmost kind of focus of MDS. And in fact, prior to my joining the organization, there was a lot of time and effort that went into ensuring that MDS was GDPR compliant, knowing that GDPR was one of the highest standard of data privacy kind of in the land, that making sure that as cities were looking to adopt MDS in Europe in particular, that they could say that MDS is GDPR compliant. And now we're in the process of ensuring MDS 2.0 is GDPR compliant as well. And in fact, the city of Amsterdam is now a member of the board of directors of the OMF, and they were one of the kind of a very vocal, I don't want to say critic, but they were like critic in the sense of wanting to make sure that this was that MDS was going to meet their needs from a privacy perspective as well. And now they're on board helping us lead this.
And I'll just add, from a city perspective, I think it's really important to underline that cities have actually been gathering substantive amounts of PII information from individuals for quite some time. The data that we're collecting from the digital operators, whether we're talking about dockless vehicles or whether we're talking about taxis, is much less invasive. There is no sort of personal identifiable information in a direct way, right? So cities have been collecting this data for a long time. We take the privacy really seriously. In Los Angeles, we have a set of, data privacy principles that are actually embedded in the legislation that allows us to have a permitting scheme for dockless vehicles and now taxis, and every other mode that we put onto MDS will have the same really high level of data privacy standards that people have to agree to be a part of the system, of the ecosystem. But again, I think that it's critical that we actually have access to this data in a way that the private sector has in droves, right? I think it's important for us to have that parity.
Huge. I'm going to consider this a success, guys, right? We're celebrating. We sparked some interest and curiosity. We got some volunteers and participants for the committees on privacy. I heard that today. So really enthusiastic about this conversation. We are at time, but I think,
Carlos, can I do, as a membership organization, I have to actually plug. So before you close us out, we're a membership organization of public agencies and private technology mobility operators. So if you're interested in engaging with us, please, Michael, Angela, myself, Connie, Carlos, others, are great ambassadors and representatives. Talk to them about why it's valuable as a public agency to get involved in our work, and then certainly as a commercial company, why participating in this kind of open collaborative environment is valuable.
Completely on point. So please feel free to reach out. My friends from Ponce, to you guys too. Let's reach out to us. This is phenomenal. I'm really enthusiastic about the future for us to move forward, and the work that we're doing is a really great outcome for our community, right? So if you can, please join me in a round of applause for these folks in here. Thank you very much.